Um, Welcome. My name is Douglas McDowell. We're going to cover FinOps optimizing ROI for database workloads. And thanks so much, Deepthi, for moderating and keeping us all sane. We're going to spend about the next hour together, so probably good to get to know one another a little bit, or at least for you to get to know me. Spent a lot of time in the database space. I started out in services. I worked for companies like Intelenet and SolidQ. Was one of the companies I helped found and grow. And then I moved over to software, worked for SentryOne, and then on to SolarWinds and did some work for DB24. And during that whole time, I very involved in the database community. I was a MVP 11 years, honored to be part of that program, very involved in the PASS organization. There's my retro throwback logo there, and part of Microsoft's Partner Advisory Council. I now am the COO of Fortified. And if you were, I think that we did a lunch session. So if you were on the lunch session with Scott Fallon, that's a colleague of mine, and you got to see what we're working on. Personally, I like skiing. I like to inflict pain on myself, so I run marathons. And also, just given that background and what I do now, you are in the data director track, and it makes me a good fit for that. I don't spend every day at the keyboard, building reports or analytical solutions, lots of the things I used to do. But there is a certain culture to database people. I like to say that data people are a special kind of crazy. This is a picture of I went to a small college in Illinois called Wheaton. I played Division III football, and the craziest people were right behind me while I was standing on the sidelines, and they were the swimmers, and they were just it didn't matter if it was 20 degrees. There were guys like that were had no shirt on, and their face painted, and they were screaming, and they were a special kind of crazy. And database people are a bit like that. And I like to call that out because sometimes we don't realize that, and we don't realize, kind of how the rest of the organization sometimes looks at us. It's not just your toddler that's looking at you out of the side of their eyes or side of their head. It's somebody else, because we're data people and we're just a little wound a little differently. And so to just to help you understand is that databases are complex, and people that don't understand complex things or don't understand a specific complex thing, they put things in what I call a black box, and they just, okay, then it's manageable in their head. They don't have to understand it, but they kind of have a container that they put it in. And it causes a certain amount of, drift in organizations, sometimes conflict. I don't know if you guys remember what this is. This is called an office. We used to like go to it every day, and those are cubes on the side, and there's people that actually might have an office with a door on it. If you can see there, I put a little CFO label down at the end, and the data team's out in the cubes, and it was a long distance down the hall between the data team and the CFO, and maybe elevators or stairs in between, maybe in different buildings, different states, but whatever. There's a cultural divide. And I think back to conversations I would have with the CFO, and finally remember the topics that might come up, like, why would you possibly need such an expensive server? And but luckily we've gotten past that. We've got a bit of progress, and they ask different questions and say different things, like, our cloud bill is killing us. So that's really what I want to talk about today. I was promoting this session last week, put something out on LinkedIn, and one of my colleagues, Stephen Dykes, he put a comment in there. He says, as a DBA, the hardest ideas to convey up the chain of command is resource utilization. Equating dollars to resource consumption, FinOps, allows a better understanding and communication within the business. Very valuable info for all. I love that. That's really why I hope you're here, and hopefully this will be helpful for you. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I don't know if you've ever been introduced to Edgar Dale's cone of experience, but I just want to call out that, when we experience things, there's only so much that we actually remember or retain. So depending on whether we read it, hear it, see it, pay attention, best case scenarios between 10 and 30%. And so a bit of a spoiler alert, I'm going to call out right at the beginning what I think you should remember, what I want to make sure is the salient points or residual message. So bear with me as I go through this, and then we'll unpack a lot of this if it doesn't make sense yet, or this is why you're here and you want to dig in on it. So cloud spending is out of control at many companies. Therefore, something called FinOps is on the rise. And cloud costs have given a new focus to overall tech costs. So that means that you can apply FinOps principles, not just to the cloud, but also to the rest of technology, whether it be on-prem or hybrid environments. The thing to keep in mind is that database workloads are expensive. A lot of storage, a lot of compute, they drive a lot of cloud consumption. Therefore, they drive the highest cost. So that uniquely positions you as data pros because you're uniquely equipped to wrangle cloud costs. You can make an impact on your organization's cloud costs or overall tech costs. And the key to that is shifting your metrics to understand the impact of resource utilization and allocating them and understanding that performance is not always the same as costs. And I want to introduce you to a concept called Finops Observability, and hopefully that you can introduce or you can adopt that. And so really this is, your moment because you have the ability to help with cloud costs. So that kind of leads me right into why you should care. I really think it'll help you broaden your horizons and engage differently with folks on the business side of your company. Yes, you're a special kind of crazy, but let's help you connect and have a shared language and understand other stakeholders' needs. Not that you don't already, but let's broaden that. Help you to become cost savvy as a data pro and be very focused on your data environment that you can be cost effective and value creating. And who knows, good things may happen. You may get a gold star promotion at your next review. So again, this is your moment. There's a lot going on that is creating bit of a perfect storm, a bit of convergence of different trends. There seems to be a steady decline in just the number of data pros out there. A lot of people are retiring out, they're less specialized. Therefore, a lot of people that are data pros have less database expertise. So that's on a bit of a decline. But other stuff is happening with data. Everybody's keeping it. So data size is increasing and having more is more valuable to train machine learning and AI. And the criticality of data, it's become understood that data is the most valuable asset in an organization. It's the currency of business. And therefore, the cost of data is being driven up. And it's greatly amplified by cloud adoption. There's a bunch of other things that are going on at the same time. So there's other data-dependent workloads. As I already mentioned, AI is a huge one where it benefits from lots of data, keeping lots of data, and so it creates more value from data. Regrettably, though, budgets, IT budgets in general, which equates to database budgets and data group budgets, tend to be really flat. There's a lot of reduction in force. People will leave or retire and aren't backfilled, and the smaller team is expected to do just as much. There's a weird stuff happening where folks put things in the cloud and there's a knee-jerk reaction because it's poorly planned or so expensive, they will bring it back on premises. And then there's a lot of legacy systems that database experts are expected to maintain. So they don't make sense to upgrade, or they can't be upgraded, or whatever the situation is, and you've got to add that to your workload. And at the same time, everybody's expecting a higher velocity of innovation. They said that this is in 2019. I was reading this just yesterday, I guess, when I was doing some preparation, and I was reading an article in 2019. They were saying that AI had basically collapsed Moore's law. Instead of the pace of technology, doubling every 24 months, it was around 3.4 months in because of AI, and that was 5 years ago. And I was looking for some newer data on that, but either way, it's just really scary. So therefore, hopefully I set the table a bit. The items that we're going to cover here, we're going to go through ROI. It's in the title, but we're going to go through it kind of quickly. And this isn't a math or finance class, so it's going to be at somewhat of a high level. We're going to talk about Capex, capital expenditures versus operation expenditures. Talk about FinOps. Maybe it's brand new to you. Maybe it's something you've been doing for a few years. And then wrap things up with Finops Observability, how to apply that within your environment. So return on investment, really bang for the buck. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And pretty straightforward when we think about it. Kind of the old school way is that if you looked at simple ROI, you might have a project that costs a certain amount and you could save a certain amount. Different examples are there at the bottom of the slide, downsizing your infrastructure, optimizing your storage, automating certain things. Those might be cost savings. And just based on that, you could say, well, I'm going to divide those, and turns out that there's a 26% ROI. The payback on that would be 3.8 years. But the thing that I want to impress on you is that ROI is multifaceted. So it's not just cost savings. There's also cost avoidance, things that might come up that I would have to pay for that now I don't have to. Maybe not, as much expansion, capacity planning and forecasting. What might not need as many servers. Disaster recovery. I put things in place so that I don't have to react and have a expensive disaster to react to. Don't have to expand my data center. So you might have another way of returning on that project investment. And then if you're really focused on value creation, well, then you look at, hey, doing this project can actually improve the business, add a new line of business, and revenue generation can be a result of that. And so maybe doing this project helps you have faster time to market and beat competition, or have a better customer experience, release a new product, something like that. So make sure that you're looking across and considering, and each one of these has different stakeholders. They, IT might be very focused on the cost savings, where the product organization is very focused on the revenue generation. And so make sure that you are looking across all of the different places that a project or any type of decision that you're making has, might have benefits. So we'll come back to this. This is just important foundational stuff. But I want to make sure to wade into Opex versus Capex, because this is really where the game has changed, and kind of welcome you to the subscription economy. So when we think about Capex and Opex, it's really demonstrates a fundamental shift in the way we think. And capital expenditures, this may be stuff that you're very familiar with, maybe new because you spend more time in T-SQL and not as much about talking to finance. But capital expenditures are, making an upfront investment, physical or infrastructure. A good example is building an on-premises data center. We used to have a new project, and so we had to requisition servers and the software for them and everything like that. Things got a lot faster as we virtualized, but now we've turned into more of a utility type of approach because we moved to Opex, especially with the cloud. And that's when you have a subscription to something. Ongoing expenses for daily operations, they're recurring, they're paid kind of as you use them, monthly or annually. And very much the case of subscribing to cloud services, especially on a pay-as-you-go model. There's a company called Zuara that does a lot of research on this because they specialize in subscription, and they have the subscription economy index. And there's a, all of my slides or most of my slides have different references either on the slide or at the end. And they have a SEI or subscription economy index report that's very interesting to read. But I gleaned a few things out of there, and customers are leaning in very heavily into the subscription economy, and they'd rather pay recurring fees and rent it rather than own it, basically. And they like the convenience, the customization, and this is whether it's B2C or B2B. But in the B2B space, already 80% of software has been shifted from what we used to call perpetual licensing or upfront Capex type of licensing to Opex or subscription licensing. And then Gartner says by 2026, 75% of services organizations are going to be moving to a subscription model. We see a lot of that with the rise in popularity around managed services, and people would rather just know what that is going to be and pay it on a monthly basis. And if it's not a good fit for them, they can cancel it and back away from it. You're getting the idea if you didn't already have it, but it's easier to think about it sometimes in the same way we make car decisions. And some folks, would prefer to have a brand new car, be able to change it out, have all the maintenance included. That's more of a leasing model, which is more of an Opex model versus making that big purchase and then owning everything and then, kind of driving it until the wheels fall off. And the same is true for whether it's a data center or whether it's a cloud environment. And, Gartner really calls out that cloud adoption accelerates organizations, but they really have to make that shift in financial mindset so that they, are continuously controlling their costs rather than making those large upfront investments. So all to say that the game has significantly changed when it comes to IT investments and infrastructure. All stuff you already know, but hopefully articulating it in a way that, one of the things is I want to make it useful for you to walk down that long hallway and interact with other folks the same way that they talk about it and think about it. But wait a second here. I've just introduced some apples and oranges because, sometimes you might have a lot of mixed investments in your environment, or you might be thinking about things the way we used to do things instead of the way we should be thinking about them. So let me just bring back that ROI slide and say, things are a little bit different when we start to think about ROI of a project, but we think about it over a longer time frame, because there's the project cost and then there's the operational cost. So that original 1 year ROI, if you start to look at it over 3 years, and this is making a bunch of assumptions like the cost savings, cost avoidance, revenue generation are all going to be the same each year. And then there's going to be an operational cost that's, smaller than the original project cost. So if there's good ROI on a project, kind of with the initial project, over time, over a 3-year horizon, the ROI is actually going to get better because it's an efficient project. It yields a lot of value. Now, the converse can be just the same. You could have declining ROI, where, like, for instance, if the annual cost savings were only for the first 2 years, and then it wouldn't have mattered in the 3rd year because you wouldn't have had that expense. Or maybe there wasn't any annual revenue generation at all. And so maybe there wasn't a good ROI to begin with. And then each year that the project continues, the ROI actually decreases. So you need to have your eyes wide open. And that's really where looking at things Capex, Opex, and then as we start to get into FinOps, the discipline around that is really useful. One note is that sometimes you have to go the opposite direction. Sometimes your environment still does a lot of things, certain investments on Capex. And so I liken it to, cramming the square peg into the round hole, making an Opex item fit into Capex. And you can just do that by taking multiple years and doing an upfront modeling of that, or going ahead and prepaying on something. So an example there is that if you have subscription software that normally would be an annual subscription, you might prepay it for 5 years and then depreciate it over the 5 years. That's how your CFO would do it. And so if they're, for instance, saying, oh, we can't buy that because they demand that it's an annual subscription, don't let that be the end of the road. If you need that software, for instance, go back to the software vendor and say, hey, can we do a 3-year subscription? Can we do a 5-year subscription? Because we need to make this a capital expenditure versus an operational expenditure. And that's usually a good way, and that works with finance. So let's talk about FinOps. FinOps, if you're not familiar with the term, where did it come from? Well, it's finance plus DevOps. So it's adding the agility of DevOps and the cadence and the continuous improvement to finance, or vice versa, the finance to how you do technology, and looking at that finance lens. So there's some really good resources out there. I'll call your attention to Finops Foundation. I'm not saying it's the only resource, but it's a great way to go. It's a good knowledge center, and they are available, finops.org. They're trailblazing and independent. They are now in conjunction with the Linux Foundation, and they have very much an open source mindset, collaborative mindset, and are very focused on making your IT environment a value centric and cost centric. Don't let your FinOps practice invoke a race to the bottom. We'll talk more about that. If you go to Cloud Zero, they actually have a little FinOps 101 course, which is, Finops Foundation has courseware as well. But if you just want to do a quick primer and not get into kind of the training and certification, that Finops Foundation has a in-depth stuff. A little bit quicker than that is out at Cloud Zero. I pulled some things out of there. And they call out FinOps as a practice of maximizing the ROI on your cloud investment. And pretty consistent in the research that I've done across Forrester, Gartner, your Cloud Zero, Statistica, IDC, 20 to 30% of cloud spending is what people are commonly saying is happening, which is pretty substantial. And so having a acute focus on your cloud spending and having good practices, it's always the conjunction of people, processes, and technology to make anything work well in an organization. And that's having that focus with your people, processes, and technology can really change how much you're spending on technology. I've already talked a little bit about giving your different teams a shared language to understand and discuss cloud usage, so that there's a level playing field of how we're talking about things and communicating. And it's really about bringing together the builders, the engineers with the payers, the finance team, but also the rest of the organization that can collaborate on it. And a key thing is making sure every cloud user in an organization is aware of and accountable for their cloud usage. And so usually that takes a lot of transparency and just a different approach in sharing information and getting a hold of things. What does it not mean is, minimizing your cloud spend. Again, it's all about getting the most possible value. It's not about trying to make your cloud bill zero, because technology, especially quality technology, has a price tag. And it's all about delivering good end services to the end customer, end user. And so it's all about making the right, bang for the buck, ROI. Those are all the key labels to put on that. And it's not only about optimizing. It's a much broader practice. You can use a lot of things like reserve instances and savings plans, enterprise discount programs, Microsoft Azure commitment to consume, all these EDP programs or enterprise agreement programs. but I'm going to talk about things that you can make a difference with in a more granular fashion. IDC grabbed a white paper of theirs. Again, 20 to 30% of cloud spend is wasted, is what they are finding in their research. Over on the left-hand side, you can see that 50%. 50% of CEOs are very or extremely concerned about growing cloud expenditures. But really, the important mindset is having your cloud spend focused on value and innovation. How can you get good value from it? And that all comes down to understanding what the true cost of cloud is and where you can get value from it, so getting that ROI. Again, I'll reiterate over and over, because it seems like sometimes it's all about making our cloud bill as small as possible, but it can't be a race to the bottom. There's a floor to where you can provide value, and making sure that you have that delicate balance. So more in the spirit of FinOps 101 and making sure that you can be a first-class citizen, seat at the table in FinOps conversations, or be a leader, is understanding some of the core tenets of that and the key practices. So first off, core tenets is collaboration, having teams that collaborate and are synergistic problem solving, and they're working across organizational lines so that they can get the most from their investments. And you're looking at the business value. Where can we avoid costs? Can we save money and add new lines of business or revenue, or generate new revenue? I love number 3, because I keep coming back to that, is everyone takes ownership of their cloud usage. And so that's equipping people with the information so that there's awareness, and then equipping them with the tools to do something about that. So the key practices there are cloud cost allocation, so people do know what to do. Budgeting and forecasting, understanding where operational expenses are expected to go, so that you can spot anomalies and rein those in or make proactive decisions. Real-time cost monitoring. So one of the limitations often is around having static reporting, but if you can have real-time cost monitoring, then you can do something about it in a timely, make adjustments when it actually matters. And then do that resource optimization, right-sizing, auto-scaling, reserve instance planning. So these are traditional FinOps. We're going to talk in more specificity about you as a data director, the FinOps and Finops Observability that you can use to do more specific types of optimization around database workloads. So we'll leave the FinOps section of my presentation with a call to action. Is that I want to implore you to adopt FinOps. Maybe it's already in your organization, and sometimes it's siloed because it's not hasn't been fully integrated in your organization, and you're not part of it. Or maybe it doesn't exist yet, and you can start to usher that in. And the reasons that you need to do that is so that you can have actionable insights. So 60% of enterprises will implement structured FinOps frameworks by 2026. So it's on the rise. Whether you're going to be a leader within your organization with it, or whether it's going to find its way to you, expect that it's going to happen in most organizations, a majority. I've already talked about the high cloud costs, and where if you don't have some acute focus on the cost of your operational expenses around tech, that you're going to run higher than expected costs, and that's going to hurt you with competition. Your margins will be affected. Depends on what line of business that you're in, but it's going to affect the business. Also, you can create strategic leverage. Build a competency around it, whether you build a center of excellence or whatever your approach is. But if FinOps is a competency, for you in your organization, within your data group specifically, where high costs can incur, then you're going to get more strategic value from it. And getting started is all about partnering. So whether that's going out and becoming a leader and doing some training and certification just to better understand it and to teach others within your organization, or whether that's finding who owns FinOps within your organization and making sure that it's fully integrated and it's not just some top-down or siloed approach within your organization, because that's going to really limit its impact. So that was a really quick crash course on FinOps. I want to spend a little bit of time on what we've dubbed Finops Observability. And so Finops Observability is, back to that IDC white paper on controlling cloud costs. Some top challenges. I just pulled out the North American ones. They're similar across the world, but developing accurate cloud expenditure forecasts. 49% of organizations are having difficulty with that. Understanding how to optimize cloud spend for architectural and business benefit, 45% of organizations there, and getting insight into waste and oversizing, 40%. So a lot of common problems. So you need something actionable to move forward around FinOps, rather than just negotiating your best deals with your cloud environment or your cloud providers, or being aware of the costs. And that's where it's really about adopting performance and finance metrics to score your workloads based on ROI. So I've spent a lot of time in the monitoring and observability space. And I found that as we started to push things into the cloud, we're abdicating a certain amount of control that we then, is outside of what we can actually do, but then we don't always keep track of how much that's costing us. And so, back to the performance we've been chasing for years. It's always been about how much performance can we get, and that's because that's a Capex mindset. It's that we bought this server, how much performance can we get out of it? Where now we can buy as much performance as we want. We need to understand how much that costs and whether it's worthwhile to keep paying for it. So you're going to need to use intelligent instrumentation to deliver the best user experience for the lowest cost. It's really, how do I balance those? And it comes down to having as much knowledge as possible and then being able to do actionable things. So we just talked about traditional FinOps, so to speak. And it has some limitations because it loses resolution, as I like to think, as it kind of goes down the tech stack, or goes from the overall cloud build down to specific workloads. It just doesn't have good workload level insights. And oftentimes, it's because finance tends to be the champion of FinOps, and they're driving that. And they're not special kind of crazy data people that actually know what happens inside that black box. And, so that leads to that siloed cost visibility, where they know how much, maybe down to a virtual machine, or, reserved instance costs or something like that, but not what to do about making that specific workload more efficient. There's a lot of static reporting. The cloud bill comes at the end of the month, then you're reacting to it. You're always in reactive mode. And then we're not using automation enough. And, the humdinger there is inability to optimize your database in data-heavy workloads. Again, what I was saying before is that database workloads tend to drive the most cloud consumption. And so therefore, you're going to spend a lot on storage, a lot on compute. And if you can do something about that, then you can make a material impact on your cloud spend. Back to that IDC, I pulled another slide out of that white paper, or another graphic out of there, and they were, they did a survey of the strategies to optimize cloud spend. I could go through all 9 or so of these, but just look at the top 3: and enhancing your cloud sourcing and vendor management function, reducing your cloud infrastructure spend, consolidating your SaaS contract. Those are not looking inside workloads, and they tend to be a level of top-down policing. That's what those little icons are supposed to mean up in the upper right-hand corner there. And so I think that those are great, but those are things that, as a data director or a data pro or as a DBA, you're going to, you have somebody bludgeoning you to reduce your cloud infrastructure spend. Okay, that's great, but you're going to need something prescriptive to do within your workloads to actually make a difference there. So that's where Finops Observability comes in, because it's all about retooling your monitoring for ROI. There's an intersection of FinOps and observability, thus the name, and that's integrating FinOps into the monitoring and being able to put those financial metrics into the same thing as looking at CPU and storage costs and where you're blocking and any of the things that you're looking at for database monitoring and observability. And that gives you that operational plus finance visibility. Then you can actually do something actionable to affect the costs, and then you can start to automate those optimizations so that they're happening. I've never met a strong DBA that doesn't use a bunch of automation, and so adding into their automation toolkit how to bring down their financial footprint. And again, that Capex to Opex, so you're shifting mindsets from performance to cost and ROI. So, we've been chasing performance for decades, like the dog there caught his tail. And so now what do? We can pay for as much performance as we want to, but should we? We probably shouldn't. So we need to empower the engineers with cost awareness so that they're making deliberate decisions about their environment and can make the best trade-off type of decisions about, is it worthwhile to pay for performance here, or can I do things within my environment to optimize, make it more efficient so that it costs less and still gives a good end user experience. And as you grow in your FinOps maturity, you're going to gain competitive advantage. You're going to be able to start dropping money to the bottom line in the overall company P&L, or be able to do much more with a flatlined budget or with a smaller team. Some of those other restrictions I talked about in the original pain point slide that I talked about early on. So, wow, there's a lot of work to do. It seems like a bit of a hill to climb. And, how do I go about that, Douglas? Well, there's a lot of things that you can do. We have a limited time together, so I'm going to focus on 3 things. Easy to remember, 3 C's: code, copies, and culture. And so let's talk about code first. There's the Pareto Principle. You've probably heard of it before. A lot of companies say that 80% of their business or revenue comes from 20% of their customer base. Pretty standard that businesses shake out that way. But that same type of Pareto analysis or rule applies to what goes on in your environment. So basically, 10 to 20% of your code is the problematic code or the most used code. Maybe it's not problematic, it's just the most used or runs the most often. It drives 80 to 90% of your database cost. And so all of a sudden, that's a bit of a relief. Is that, okay, I don't have to go and optimize my whole data estate. I just need to figure out which 10 to 20% of my code creates 80 to 90% of my database costs, and then really focus, maniacally focus on how to make that code efficient. That's a much more tangible and prescriptive way to move forward. And we need better instrumentation to do that. So you need to tighten the cause and effect, get away from that static reporting that lags, and make sure that you're using the metrics and instrumentation that are Opex focused, understanding what your cloud cost is. Now, you can use notional costs. If you have a general idea of how much a workload costs in Azure and AWS, GCP, whatever you're using, then you can use that to make more real-time decisions and not have to wait for when the cloud bill comes. And, I put the picture up here is that anybody that's moved from, a car that didn't track miles per gallon or couldn't put it on the dashboard to one that does, it's a fascinating change in driving behavior that sometimes happens, is that you look down and you go, holy cow, when I press the accelerator, I use a lot more gas. Even if it's an EV, when I press the accelerator, it drains my battery quickly. And we all knew that. It's obvious. But when you actually tighten that cause and effect loop, you go, oh, I can do something about that. I don't need to come off the start line that fast. Or, hey, it's really fun to peel out and tear away from the red light, and it's worth it every time. But you're making a deliberate decision on what you're doing. And so think about that from your monitoring and observability, is that what do I need? What information do I need on a daily basis to understand what my cost footprint is, how much that workload costs, how much that query costs. And so that's tightening that cause and effect workload. Also, when you think about code, how long will it live? Keep in mind, code doesn't have an expiration date. There are systems that stay out there forever and are inherited over decades. And efficient code has high ROI that gets better every day. Inefficient code has poor ROI that gets worse every day. Remember when I was talking about earlier in the pain slide where persistent legacy systems that we have to keep up with? The ones that are very inefficient. Well, if they knew that system was going to be around, or just thought in a more future-looking arc, then they would have written more efficient code, and it would have saved thousands, millions over the 10 to 20 years that application was in service. So keep that in mind, is that you don't know how long your code will live. So make it efficient. So, oh, we'll tell them to shift left. Yes, exactly. We need to think about efficiency and performance and cost effectiveness in our design phase, and bring that through our design to development and all the way into production. So that's talking about code. Let's talk about copies. Redundant data. This is all stuff we already know, but we have to revisit it with that Opex mindset. How many environments do you have? How many environments do you have that you don't know about? So how many copies of data do you have? If you're just doing something for development or for testing, do you need the full database? Or can it be done with something smaller? If somebody did some type of analysis, crisis management type of thing, that crisis is over, can that database be gone? Go and look for unused databases, get rid of them, and reduce the amount of data that you're storing and maintaining. Also, bloated databases. I used to have a Ford Excursion, 2003, I think was the model year, looked almost exactly like this. And it was great for when I was doing scouting and lots of kids and camping equipment and things like that. And then all of a sudden, that chapter of my life kind of ended. My son went off to college, and all of a sudden I had this massive vehicle that didn't need everything that was in it. And it was expensive to drive around as a daily driver. A lot of your databases are like that. They have a whole bunch of stuff that's not the data, but other stuff that is taking up a bunch of space. So you need to take a look at all of those things. Indexes take up a ton of space, materialized views, temporary tables. How many backup files do you have? How long are you keeping the backup files? So a lot of bloat that happens within each of those databases. Also data hoarding. Just how long do you need to keep data around? Unused databases again. And whether you need to keep things around, do you have a policy? Are you in compliance with that policy? So copies of data. Also, there's copies of queries. So great, you've optimized a query, a green van there. But guess what? That query runs myriad of other places in your environment. Maybe you have that same database, one for each client. So you've got your code at scale. And so your cost of code is actually, you need to have an enterprise view on that. Where all is this running? And if I optimize this code, have I optimized it everywhere that it runs so that I can get the best value and effectiveness for that? That's copies. So we talked about code, we talked about copies, and lastly, let's talk about culture. To revisit what I was saying before, partnering with FinOps, whether you're the leader and you're bringing FinOps in your organization, or whether that's you seeking out saying, wait a second, I heard that we were doing this, but they haven't come and consulted me. I own the expensive workloads. Let's collaborate. And so go and find them, or go and be a FinOps leader yourself, but be a partner with FinOps. And then design with the future in mind. For folks that are my age, they remember Y2K. More recently, we all still have a little bit of a tick around GDPR and packing in data protection after the fact. So Y2K, we were inheriting old technology, and we had to make changes to technology after the fact because people didn't look at the future. Oh, we'll never get to the year 2000. We'd never have to have 4-digit years. GDPR. Oh, now we have to put data protection on all of our systems after the fact that they're in production. So these are things that are after the fact. So you need to design with the future in mind. And so what does that mean is that historically, we've been very focused on functionality. That's our acceptance criteria. Does it do what it needs to? Is it modeled correctly? Does it have the right feature and functionality? Great, check, 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 into production. But you need to expand that definition. How efficient is it? What is the cost? What's its impact? Wherever you're measuring impact. That's your new acceptance criteria. And make sure that you're thinking about it from an operational ownership perspective over multiple years, even multiple decades. Again, got to tell them to shift left. Yeah, we've got to think about this by design and by default, that efficiency and cost is baked into how we build database systems. So that all comes down to making sure that you're empowering your engineers with cost awareness. Again, moving away from static reporting and making sure that you're able to actually look at how much a given database workload costs, and then look inside of that so that when you start to say, what is the 10 to 20% of my code that is driving 80 to 90% of my cost, knowing what that is. And it's not just about what's poorly performing, but it's what's using the most resources. And again, it's great when you can get true cost and get that quickly, but if you can't, use notional cost. Use estimates on this is how much this type of workload costs, and then therefore a percentage of that is being utilized by this query or this database, and then therefore where to focus to make a difference. And then you're able to make a material impact on your cloud bill, and very much in an Opex frame of mind. Those were the salient things that I wanted to get through. So back to where we started. What should you remember? What should you take away from this? Is that companies a lot of them are in a bit of a crisis because cloud spending is out of control. And so we're seeing the introduction and the rise of FinOps. And also, this very acute focus on cloud spending has brought about new ways of thinking about things that can also be applied not just to the cloud. So even if you're on-prem or doing a hybrid, look at your cost of technology, your efficiency, your overall TCO, multi-year costing of your environment and your projects across many years so that you can make good decisions. Understand that you have a bigger seat at the table when it comes to FinOps because database workloads drive a lot of cost. Again, whether that's cloud cost or whether that's on-premises cost, databases take up a bunch of storage space, a bunch of compute, they drive bits on the wire. So basically everything that spins cloud consumption is stuff that databases are cost hogs on. So that makes you a unique person in the organization because you're uniquely equipped to look inside that complex black box and make a difference and wrangle the cloud costs. You can do that by focusing on 3 different things that I walk through: the code, copies of your data, and then the culture that you instill around that. And really, the place to start is shifting your metrics to understand how your resource utilization and allocation are tracked, and moving away from just performance tracking because performance is not always equal to cost. And to do that, you need to add FinOps to your monitoring and observability, something that I've dubbed Finops Observability. And it is one of the most important tools in your toolbox to make a difference for your overall organization and ultimately for your end users of your application, whether they be internal or external.